When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr, Chapter 3. After that, everything seemed to go very quickly, like a film that had been sped up. Heimpy was busy sorting and packing all day long. Mama was nearly always out or on the telephone arranging for the lease of the house or for the storage of the furniture after they had gone. Every day when the children came home from school, the house looked more bare. One day, Uncle Julius called while they were helping Mama to pack some books. He looked at the empty shelves and smiled. "You're putting them all back again, you know." That night, the children were woken up by the sound of fire engines. Not just one or two, but about a dozen were clanging their bells and racing along the main road to the end of the street. When they looked out the window, the sky above the center of Berlin was a brilliant orange. Next morning, everyone was talking about the fire which had destroyed the Reichstag, where the German parliament met. The Nazis said that the fire had been started by revolutionaries and that the Nazis were the only people who could put a stop to that sort of thing. So everyone must vote for them at the elections. But Mama had heard the Nazis had started the fire themselves. When Uncle Julius called that afternoon for the first time, he did not say anything to Mama about her being back in Berlin in a few weeks' time. The last days Anna and Max spent at school were very strange. As they were not allowed to tell anyone they were leaving, they kept forgetting about it themselves during school hours. Anna was delighted when she was given a part in the school play and only remembered afterward that she would never actually appear in it. Mama accepted an invitation to a birthday party which she would never be able to attend. Then they would go home to the ever emptier rooms, the wooden crates and the suitcases, the endless sorting of possessions. Deciding which toys to take was the hardest part. They naturally wanted to take the games compendium, but it was too big. In the end, there was only room for some books and one of Anna's stuffed toys. Should she choose Pink Rabbit, which had been her companion ever since she could remember, or a newly acquired woolly dog? It seemed a pity to leave the dog when she hardly had time to play with it. And Heimpy packed it for her. Max took his football. They could always have more things sent to them in Switzerland, and Mama, if it looked as though they were going to stay, they could always have more things sent to them in Switzerland, said Mama, if it looked as though they were going to stay there a very long time. When school was over on Friday, Anna went up to her teacher and said quietly, "I shan't be coming to school tomorrow. We're going to Switzerland." Fräulein Schmidt did not look nearly as surprised as Anna expected, but only said, yes, I wish you luck." Elsbeth was not very interested either. She just said she wished she herself were going to Switzerland, but that this was not likely to happen because her father worked in the post office. Gunther was the hardest person to leave. Max brought him back to lunch after they had walked back from school together for the last time, though there were only sandwiches because Heimpy had not had time to cook. Afterwards, they played hide-and-seek, rather half-heartedly, among the packing cases. It was not much fun because Max and Gunther were so clumsy, and Anna had to struggle to keep down her own excitement. She was fond of Gunther and sorry to leave him, but all she could think was, this time tomorrow we'll be on the train. This time on Sunday we'll be in Switzerland. This time on Monday. At last, Gunther went home. Heimpy had sorted out a lot of clothes for his mum in the course of her packing, and Max went with him to help him carry them. When he came back, he seemed more cheerful. He had dreaded saying goodbye to Gunther more than anything. Now, at least, it was over. Next morning, Anna and Max were ready long before it was time to leave. Heimpy checked that their nails were clean, that they both had handkerchiefs, 2 for Anna because she had a bit of a cold, and that their socks were held up properly by elastic bands. "Goodness knows what state you'll get into by yourselves," she grumbled. "But you'll be with us again in a fortnight," said Anna. "There's a lot of dirt can settle on the neck of a fortnight," said Heimpy darkly. Then there was nothing more to do until the taxi came. "Let's go right through the house for the last time," said Max. They started at the top and worked down. Most of it no longer looked like itself. All the smaller things had been packed. Some of the rags had been rolled up, and there were newspapers and packing cases everywhere. They ticked off the rooms as they went through them, shouting, "Goodbye, Papa's bedroom! Goodbye, landing. Goodbye, stairs. Don't get too excited, said Mama as they passed her. Goodbye, hall. Goodbye, drawing room. They went through too quickly, so Max shouted, Goodbye, piano. Goodbye, sofa. And Anna took it up with, Goodbye, curtains. Goodbye, dining table. Goodbye, hatch. Just as she shouted, Goodbye, hatch, its two small doors opened and Hype's head appeared looking through from the pantry. Suddenly, something contracted in Anna's stomach. This was just what Hype had done to amuse her when she was small. They had played a game called Peeping Through the Hatch, and Anna had loved it. How could she suddenly be going away? In spite of herself, her eyes filled with tears, and she cried idiotically, Oh, Hype, I don't want to leave you and the hatch. But I can't pack it in my suitcase, said Hype, coming into the dining room. You're sure you'll come to Switzerland? I don't know what else I'd do, said Hype. Your mamma has given me my ticket, and I've got it in my purse. Hype, said Max, if you suddenly found you had a lot of room in your suitcase, only if, mind you, do you think you could bring the games compendium? If, said Hype. If my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bus, and we could all go for a ride in her. That was what she always said. Then the doorbell rang to announce the arrival of the taxi, and there was no more time. Anna hugged Hype. Mama said, Don't forget the men are coming for the piano on Monday. And then she too hugged Hype. Max could not find his gloves, but he had them in his pocket all the time. Bertha wept, and the man who looked after the garden suddenly appeared and wished them all a pleasant journey. Just as the taxi was about to drive off, a small figure rushed up with something in his hand. It was Gunther. He thrust a parcel at Max through the window and said something about his mum, which they could not understand because the taxi had started. Max shouted goodbye, and Gunther waved. Then the taxi went up the street. Anna could still see the house and Hype and Gunther waving. She could still see a bit of the house. At the top of the street, they passed the Kentner children on their way to school. They were talking to each other and did not look up. She could still see a tiny bit of the house through the trees. Then the taxi went round the corner, and it all disappeared. It was strange traveling on the train with Mama without Hype. Anna was a little worried in case she felt sick. She had been train sick a lot when she was small, and even now that she had more or less outgrown it. Hype always brought a paper bag just in case. Did Mama have a paper bag? The train was crowded, and Anna and Max were glad that they had window seats. They both looked out at the gray landscape, tearing past until it began to rain. Then they watched the raindrops arrive with a splash and slowly trickle down the glass pane. But it became boring after a while. What now? Anna looked at Mama out of the corner of her eye. Hype usually had a few apples or some sweets about her. Mama was leaning back in her seat. The corners of her mouth were pulled down, and she was staring at the bald head of the man opposite without seeing him at all. On her lap was her big handbag with a picture of a camel on it, which she had brought back from some journey with Papa. She was holding it very tight, Anna supposed, because the tickets and passports were in it. She was clutching it so hard that one of her fingers was digging right into the camel's face. Mama, said Anna, you're squashing the camel. What? Said Mama. Then she realized what Anna meant and loosened her hold on the bag. The camel's face reappeared to Anna's relief, looking just as foolish and hopeful as usual. Are you bored? Asked Mama. We'll be traveling right through Germany, which you have never done. I hope the rain stops soon so that you can see it all. Then she told them about the orchards in southern Germany, miles and miles of them. If only we were making this journey a little later in the year, she said, you'd be able to see all the blossoms. Perhaps just a few of them might be out already, said Anna. But Mama thought it was too early, and the bald man agreed. Then they saw how beautiful it was, and Anna wished she could see it. If the blossom isn't out this time, she said, can we see it another time? Mama didn't answer at once. Then she said, I hope so. The rain did not let up. They spent a lot of time playing guessing games, at which Mama turned out to be very good. Though they could not see much of the country, they could hear the change in people's voices every time the train stopped. Some were almost incomprehensible, and Max hit the idea of asking unnecessary questions like, is this Leipzig? Or what time is it? Just for the pleasure of hearing the strangely accented replies. They had lunch in the dining car. It was very grand, with a menu to choose from, and Anna had frankfurters and potato salad, which was her favorite dish. She did not feel train sick at all. Later in the afternoon, she and Max walked through the train from end to end, and then stood in the corridor. The rain was heavier than ever, and dusk came very early. Even if the orchards had been in blossom, they would not have been able to see them. For a while they amused themselves by watching the fleeing darkness through their reflections on the glass. Then Anna's head began to ache, and her nose began to run. As though to keep pace with the rain outside, she snuggled back into her seat and wished they would get to Stuttgart. "Why don't you look at Gunther's book?" said Mamma. There had been 2 presents in Gunther's parcel. One, from Gunther to Max, was a puzzle, a little transparent box with a picture of an open-mouthed monster drawn on the bottom. You had to get 3 tiny balls into the monster's mouth. It was very difficult to do on a train. The other was a book for both children from Gunther's mum. It was called They Grew to Be Great, and she had written in it, "Thank you for all the lovely things, something to read on your journey." It described the early lives of various people who later became famous, and Anna, who had a personal interest in the subject, leafed through it eagerly at first, but the book was so dully written and its tone so determinedly uplifting that she gradually became discouraged. All the famous people had had an awful time. One of them had a drunken father, another had a stammer, another had to wash hundreds of dirty bottles. They all had what was called a difficult childhood. Clearly you had to have one if you wanted to become famous. Dozing in her corner and mopping her nose with her 2 soaked handkerchiefs, Anna wished that they would get to Stuttgart, and that one day in the long-distant future she might become famous. But as the train rumbled through Germany in the darkness, she kept thinking, difficult childhood, difficult childhood, difficult childhood. And that's the end of chapter 3.